Hi everyone, welcome to my sew along. I am going to be showing you how to make these pouches. I call them paper pouches. All you need to make it is a sheet of paper, and I give you any other measurements that you need. You need your fabric for the exterior, you need interfacing, a bit of fleece, a zipper, or 2 or 3 if you're doing an inside one, optional hardware to do a wrist strap with a lobster clasp and a D-ring. And I will tell you exactly what you need to do to get these made. So we're going to start off doing the plain version, which has a solid exterior and no pockets on the inside. There's also a version that has an interior pocket. There is a version that has an exterior pocket, and then there's a couple of different ways to add on your wrist strap. So should be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy it, and I can't wait to see what everybody makes. The first version of the pouch that I'm going to show you is the plain version that has a solid front and back and a solid inside, so no additional pockets. The things that you'll need for this version of the pattern are your exterior fabric. You will need interfacing. I like to use a woven interfacing. You can use a woven fuse, SF101, Dolce fuse, any of those options are fine. And you will need some fleece and also your lining fabric. For my lining for this version, I'm going to use waterproof canvas, which means that I don't have to interface it. If you're using a lighter weight fabric, then you will also need enough interfacing for your lining. So the pattern that we're using for this particular pouch is a sheet of paper. So you don't need to print anything. You don't need to tape anything together. That's why I call it a paper pouch. It's really easy. So let's get started. So grab your piece of paper. I'm using 8.5 by 11 because I'm in the US. If you're somewhere that uses A4 paper, that's totally fine. It'll work just as well. So take your piece of paper, and I'm going to cut my front and back at the same time. So I've got my fabric folded over there, and I'm just going to lay my piece of paper on the top, and then I like to weigh it down with a couple of washes. And then you don't have to use your ruler if you don't want to. It'll work just fine to just cut around the edge of your paper, but I like to cut around it with my ruler. So you're literally cutting out 2 pieces of fabric that are the size of a piece of paper. You will need some of your scraps. You'll need a little 2 by 2 inch piece to use as a zipper end. And if you're going to do an optional strap that I'll show you at the end, you will need that also. So as far as hardware for this particular pouch, you can use just a zipper. You can use zipper by the yard, which is what I'll be using. So you'll need your zipper pull for that too. The zipper length that you need, I say 10.5 inches. Anything longer is also fine. You just trim it down. And if you are going to do the wrist strap, optional lobster clasp. And I'm not going to do a D-ring on this version. One of the other versions I will show you how to put the D-ring in. I'm just going to be attaching my strap directly to the zipper pull there. So I'll pop those aside for now. Keeping my scraps, because I will need that to cut the strap a bit later. I need to change the blade on my rotary cutter. But they're so sharp when I change them. I don't want to change it yet. I'm scared. A little bit scared. Okay, so we have our front and our back cut. Now I will cut my interfacing the same size. again, just using a sheet of paper. This is, you can use any piece of paper. So this is just a scrap piece. You can use a piece of cardboard if it's easier, or you can just cut it by measurements if you want to as well. The good thing about this pouch is you can make it any size. You can do any size rectangle that you want, and it'll work just fine. If you're doing a lining that needs interfacing, cut out another piece, another 2 pieces rather, of interfacing for your lining as well. And then cut the lining fabric. Okay, that's all about pieces for that. And I will need a small scrap to do my zipper end. I like a 2x2 piece. Let me find a nice scrap to cut that from. And this is just going to go on the end of your zipper, the closed end of your zipper. And that does not need to be interfaced. So we have got 2 lining pieces, which if you're using a lighter fabric, you're going to want interfacing for that as well. We have our 2 exterior pieces and our 2 interfacing pieces, as well as our little piece of exterior fabric for our zipper end. The other thing that I still need to cut is our fleece, but I will cut that a little bit smaller. So we'll do that now. So these are all the exact size of our sheet of paper. Let's pop those to the side, and I'll grab the fleece. So the fleece I cut 1 inch shorter and 1 inch narrower. Now, if you're very good and you don't like to waste, you can measure that. I have more fleece than I have time, so I don't do that. I just cut it using my piece of paper, and then I trim it afterwards. This is just a little bit bunched up here. Also, be very careful that you're not accidentally cutting these bolts. Are a little cumbersome. So I'm just going to do a rough cut out of this first. To get this off the table. Take that out of the way. Oops. Okay, so I want it to be, instead of 8.5 by 11, I want it to be 7.5 by 10. So if you're making a few of these, you can always trim a piece of paper to make it a bit easier. I'm just going to do it got my 8.5 by 11 piece here. So I'm just going to get an inch of that side and an inch of that side. Okay, the next step is going to be to apply our interfacing. I prefer to apply my interfacing to my exterior fabric and then cut out the corners to box the bottom of this pouch. So make sure that there's no stray threads on your fabric anywhere. And then I'm going to apply my interfacing to this piece and to this piece. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to apply the fleece. So you're going to apply your interfacing to your exterior on both of those pieces, and then after they're on, while your press or your iron is still hot, you can apply your fleece. So I've got my 2 pieces of fleece here, but because I'm going to fuse this to the exterior pieces, I want to cut out my corners now because it will be harder to do that later. So the depth that I like for my pouches is 1 3/4 of an inch. You can do anything you want. I find that 1.5 is a little too narrow of a base, and 2 inches is not a bad size because the pouches are relatively small. It does take a decent chunk from the bottom of the pouch if you do 2 inches, but you can do whatever you want. So I do 1 3/4. So I just take my square. You can use a ruler. I do both at the same time, but you don't have to. And you just want to cut in on 2 corners. So the reason that you take the same size box, even though this piece is smaller, is because of the seam allowance. So I'm going to head over to my heat press. I'm going to apply my interfacing to my exterior, and then I'm going to put the fleece on the top there, and then I'll show you how that looks. Now we have our 4 pieces. We have our exterior with the fleece fused to it, 2 of those, and 2 interior pieces, which this is the plain interior, so they are just as they are. Again, if you're using a thinner fabric for your lining, you're going to want to put interfacing on this too. The next thing that we're going to do is cut out the corners on each of these pieces. Some people like to leave that until the end and then box their corners. I prefer to do it this way so that I can reinforce my seam at the edge, and also so that when I'm lining it up, I can get a nice flat side, and then I know that my corners are going to look really neat at the bottom. So I actually like to draw these on and then cut them with scissors. So I'm just taking my square again and the same 1 3/4 measurement. I'm just going to draw that on. And you're going to want to do it on the bottom corner of all 4 pieces. So you're going to be doing 8 total. And now we will get ready to put our zipper in. The first thing that we need to do, if you're using zipper by the yard, is to put your zipper pull on your zipper tape. So I like to use 10.5 inches for my zipper. I like to use 1/2 inch less than what my piece is. So 10.5 would put me here. Okay. If you have a zipper with the pull already installed, then you don't have to worry about this part. So just put your zipper pull on. Which one was higher there? Everyone has their own techniques for doing this. Okay, so zipper is on. Now I need to make the end tab for here. So take your 2 by 2 inch piece, fold it in half, finger press, iron, or seam roller that fold there, and then fold the raw edges in towards the middle. And then take your tab, fold it over the edge of your zipper. Because this is a nylon zipper, you can sew right over the top of that. And then I'm just going to clip that into place. And then I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm just going to sew along here at about 1/8 of an inch from the edge there. I'm going to sew the tab on the end of this zipper. I have my needle in the far left position and I line up the edge of my tab with the inside edge of my presser foot. And I'm using a 3.5 millimeter stitch length. Because this is a nylon zipper, you can sew over it, but I still like to go nice and slowly. And then just back stitch. And there you can see that tab is on. And now we'll go and I'll show you how to put that zipper in. Now I have the tab sewn on the end of this. It's time to get my zipper inserted into this pouch. There are a couple of different ways to do this. Some people like to pinch the end here and then put some hand stitches in there or a couple of machine stitches to hold that down at a 90-degree angle to stop your zipper from going off the end. I like to use the Butler method, which was invented by Amy Lynn of Patterns by Amy Lynn, and it's awesome and it works really well and it makes putting zippers in so easy. So that's the way that I'm going to do that. For this method, you do need double-sided tape. So we will do that. I use 1/8 of an inch double-sided tape to do this. So just grab your tape. I like to measure in 3/4 of an inch from the edge and start my tape there and just run it along the very edge of your front and back exterior with the pattern pieces facing each other like this. This is where the zipper opening will be. So you want it 3/4 of an inch. And then you want to do the same thing with your lining pieces. Sorry. Okay. And now you need to swap these two because this piece actually goes with that side because they will line up like this. You want the open bit to be at the same spot. So we'll put that aside for now. So the way that you do this is take your zipper with the tab already on the end, remove your double-sided tape. You could do this with clips too if you wanted to, but I find it's easy with tape. I like to line up my end tab. What measurement would that be? That's between 1/2 and 3/4. So I can't math right now. 5/8 of an inch from the edge. I grew up with a metric system, so 5/8 of an inch from the edge here, because your seam allowance will come in here and it'll just make it easy to turn that corner and give you a nice neat corner. So just pressing that down along the double-sided tape. It's not attached at the end. Then you're going to get your lining piece, peel off the tape, and you're going to lay it directly on the top there. The closed end of the zipper, it sticks down right to the end. The open end is not stuck down because that's where we will turn our zipper out to make our 90-degree end so that the pull doesn't come off. So we have that is taped in there with double-sided tape. I'm going to take it over to the machine and sew down this side. All right, let's go over. I'm using a 2.4 stitch length. Again, I have my needle in the far left position, and then I am taking 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So a couple of stitches in and then back stitch. Starting at the closed end of the zipper, you can see my tab is there. The open end of the zipper is here. Now, something that I should have done is measure 3/4 of an inch from this end here. That is where I'm going to stop to turn my zipper. So I'm just going to make a little line there. Okay, and now I'm sewing 1/4 inch seam allowance. Something to be wary of is where your pull is here. You can see my zipper pull is here. So I'm going to pull that up here, out of the way, and then when I get close to it, I will stop and I will zip it back that way. It's hard to go around that. You can see I'm not using a zipper foot. You don't have to use a zipper foot. If you prefer it, then by all means. So now I'm going to slide that back. Because I'm only taking 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and this is a size 5 zipper, there's enough room for me to just slide that past. Now sewing up to that line that I just made, 3/4 of an inch from the end, take my stitch right to the line. Now what I'm going to do is take this end here, and I'm going to pull that 90 degrees out of the way. You can see that there. Let me just move this a little closer so you can, oh, sorry. So I've just pulled that there. I've just pulled it just with my fingers, and then I'm going to sew the rest of the way past that zipper end. And I'm going to go very slowly, and I'm just going to hold it, back stitch, and then keep going, and then back stitch again at the end. You can see it's folded out of the way, and on this side it's tucked nicely in with a good amount of space from the edge for when we sew our side seam. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do the tape on the other side. I'm doing this here to save myself from having to move my camera. So what I do first of all is I like to fold these pieces, the exterior and interior that we've already sewn on, out of the way. I haven't top stitched it yet. I prefer to top stitch both at the same time at the end. That's personal preference. But to keep them out of the way, I grab a sewing clip and I just stick it at the bottom there. And then I have this side here. So now, the same as we did on the first side, going to take the tape off. Make sure that you check out Amy Lynn's videos. She does a great job of this. Changed zippers forever for me. So, lining it up, I like to line up these bits first and then slide it up to meet the zipper. So you should have that same 5/8 gap at the end, and then it's sticky from the tape. Just stick it along here. You could use clips if you wanted to. The tape just means that it doesn't shift at all. Okay, and then that's the open end there. So that is stuck down. And then I'm going to take my other lining piece and I'm going to stick that. Now, waterproof canvas, if you've not used it before, the shiny side is the wrong side. The fabricy side is the correct side. That's your side that you would have facing the inside of your bag. Okay, then putting that right side down, sandwiching that zipper, and just sticking it across until you get to the end. Now this side we're going to be sewing this way with the canvas side up. I'm going to remember to do it this time. Grab a ruler, grab a pen, and I'm just going to mark ¾ of an inch so I know where to stop with my needle. And then I'm going to sew down here, and then we will top stitch both sides of the bag. So make sure that your zipper is about halfway down to start. Then we're going to sew from the closed end of the zipper along the edge at a quarter of an inch again. Close to that zipper, I can feel it there. Just going to reach in here, lift up the presser foot, leaving the needle down, slide it back, put the presser foot back down, and just continue until I get to my line at the end there. When I get to the end, where that line is, just before the end, lift the presser foot up, take the zipper, fold it to the side, press the foot back down, hold that out of the way, careful of fingers, and then sew back over that, and then straight onto the end, back stitching when you get there. So we can see we have got our 2 exterior panels sewn, zipper in the middle there, and our interiors here. So now what we're going to do is top stitch these exterior panels. I do not top stitch my linings down. Some people prefer to sew their to do their top stitching. I can open that up. Their top stitching with both layers together. I think it turns more nicely if I don't top stitch this down. So when I top stitch, I'm just going to go through the outside. My lining is going to be folded, so I need a little bit more space here. It's going to be like this, so that I'm going to be sewing down this seam allowance, but I'm not going to be catching this part, so just sewing down here. I've opened my zipper right up now that my ends are both done, and then I'll be able to keep that more easily out of the way. close the zipper a little bit to get started. Choose your top stitch length. I like 3.5. Again, I put my needle in the far left position here, and then I line it up with the edge of my presser foot, the inside edge of my presser foot there, to help guide along the edge of the fabric. Then as I get close to the zipper, lift the presser foot up, slide my zipper out of the way. Sometimes I need to lift it a little extra. And then this whole part of the bag can just go out to the back, out of the way. Press the foot back down. There we go. Not through that part. And then the other side, the same thing. I like to just pull slightly on that as I'm going, just to make sure that this seam is nice and flat. And then just keep going along the edge there. And zip this back up. You have your zipper nicely top stitched. Now we do the side and bottom seams. The next step is to sew our side seams and our bottom seams. We're going to leave an opening in the bottom of the lining here. That's what we're going to turn our bag through. And also we need to clip the extra little bits from our zippers. You can clip those tabs too if you want to. I generally don't. But the zippers I do like to clip. So just trim that little bit extra there. I'm going to use my Wonder Clips to go around the edge here. Make sure before you clip it closed that your zipper is open at least part of the way so that you can turn the bag back through that hole in the bottom through the opening. When I'm putting my clips around the edges, I like to, line up the edges here. That's where I like to start. Make sure that my front and back are nicely lined up there. And then I just move my way around and also lining up corners. Just go right around the edge. Then I flip over, line up this side. Making sure that the edges there are lined up as neatly as possible. Matching up the edges and the corners. The more meticulous you are here, the better your finished product will be. like to leave a fairly big opening in my lining to turn the bag through rather than having to fight with the bag to get it out the right way. So I'm going to sew in about 1.5 to 2 inches from either edge. You can mark that if you want to. I'm just going to eyeball it as I'm going to leave that opening to turn the bag through, which we will then close after we've sewn up the side seams and boxed the bottoms. You don't want to have too small of a seam here because you do need to box this corner, and if it's too short, that will make that tricky. So 1.5 to 2 inches would be plenty and still leave enough space to turn it through. So let's get sewing. I like to go around this in one go. So I start at the bottom on this side because this is where my opening is going to be here. So I start on this end and then I'm going to go all the way around and come back around and stop here. I don't trim my threads between my corners. I just leave that attached, but I do back stitch at the start and the end of each section there. I'm taking a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the lining that I will gradually decrease up to 1/4 of an inch, and then I will do 1/4 of an inch around the exterior of the bag. That helps the lining to not be too baggy inside of the pouch. And away we go. Go back a little bit over the edge of the bag where the seams from the interior and exterior meet next to where your zipper is, just to reinforce it a little bit, as that might be a high stress area. So you can see we've now got our seams sewn all the way around, leaving that nice opening there at the bottom that we will turn our bag through when we are done. The next step that we need to do, the last thing before turning the bag and closing up the bottom, is to box our corners. So the way that I do that is pull apart these layers and flatten to get a nice edge. You can open your seams and sew it like that. I prefer to turn them to either side of the seam and then pull that thread out of the way. You can trim that if you want to. It'll be on the inside of the bag, so you don't have to. Clip here. I like to clip down both parts of the seam I'm just trying to get a nice flat line there. The flatter line you can get there, the better the bottom of your bag is going to look. This is a different one that I made, and you can see that the bottom of it is nice and flat there. So try to get a nice straight flat line, and then that will translate over to a nicely boxed bottom on your bag. So you want to do that on all 4 corners, the 2 lining and 2 exterior. Make sure when you're folding your seam over, if you're doing it the same way that I do, folding it to one side on the top, the other on the bottom, make sure they're going the same way on the bottom seam, otherwise you're going to end up with a twist in your bottom seam. Keeping it nicely lined up. I kind of push the corners into each other so that they meet up really nicely there. I just kind of press that down a little bit. When I do this bottom corner here, I will turn this seam the opposite way to that which I did in the lining, and that will just help it. When it gets to this end, it can kind of go either way. So again, I stick my finger in there, pull it apart, flatten that out, pushing my seams together, push, 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 put my clips in, nice straight line there, will make for a nice straight box. I'm sorry, I keep bumping the camera. Okay, and then again, pushing that the opposite way to that which I pushed the lining, keep the threads out of the way, and making sure that the seam is folded the same way so that it doesn't end up with a twist in it. I always put that middle clip in first, clips on either side, nice and flat. When I get over to the machine, you'll see that I'm going to go over that seam there a couple of times just to reinforce it a bit. So we're going to sew 1, 2, 3, 4 corners, and that'll be our boxed bottom. And we are nearly finished. So you can flatten this as best as you can. It's pretty easily able to be squished with the fleece. For the box on the exterior, I'm going to do 1/4 inch seam allowance. For the lining, I will take 3/8 inch, again, so that the lining is not baggy. Going back over that seam. Just try to keep your corners nice. Sometimes when you maneuver it, it will just get out of position. And just take it out and go back. And you just check that it's going across nice and flat. If you're happy with how straight your seam is, I'm not entirely happy with that, so I'm just going to sew that again a little straighter. But there's nothing wrong with going over this seam an extra time. It just reinforces it a bit. If you're not happy with how straight your line is, just sew it again. The inside most line is the line that's going to form the bottom of your bag. Okay, so I'm going to go around. I'm going to finish the other 3 corners, and then we'll be ready to turn it out. Let's line up that corner. If you pull the bag apart a little more, it makes it a little bit easier to line it up. The camera stand is just getting in my way a little bit here, so it's just a little trickier. The other thing you can do if you're having trouble with the corner there sliding is put a clip further down here that you won't have to undo to get started. The next thing to do, now that we've got all those corners boxed, is to turn our bag. Before I turn the bag, I'm going to trim the seam allowance here just a little bit, and that will help us to have nice corners when we turn it out. The other thing that you can do if you want is trim any of your extra seam allowances here if you think that it's going to be a little too bulky. Just trim to about 1/8 of an inch from there, not too close. You don't want to cut through too many stitches, but that's another reason why we reinforced the stitches there when we were sewing our side seam. So now we go through our hole here. That's why we opened our zipper. That will make it easier for us to turn the bag back through that hole. I'm poking out the corner here with the eyes. I'm just here in this gap here. I'm just push the tab out first, and this one on this way. Put that seam up so you just tab there, and then you see a nice, neat corner. And then before we tuck the lining in, we have to close up that hole in the bottom. This seam will be visible on the inside of the bag, so you want it to be neat. And I like to match my thread to my lining so that it's not super obvious. Goodness me, sorry about the bumping. So now just fold that opening over the same amount as the seam allowance. So that would be 3/8 is what I use for the lining here. So I just fold it first, kind of finger press a crease in it. And then if you pull your lining taut, it will help you get a nice, neat closure there. These threads are secured by the back stitching, so I can just trim that. I'll do it when I trim my other threads. And again, pulling it taut so that it's lined up without any waves or anything in it. Clip. You can use tape too if you wanted to. So pressing that down so it's nicely closed up there, and then we're going to sew along here at about 1/8 of an inch. And I've got thread that's a coordinating color to my lining so that that seam is a little bit more disguised in there. Stitching to secure. You can see my seam across the bottom there. I'm just going to trim those threads, and then I'm going to tuck the bag inside. Okay, now I'm going to tuck this inside here, pushing my corners down deep into the other corners to give it a nice, neat look. Don't be afraid to really shove your fingers in there. Okay, and then check on this little tab here. I like to poke that out a little bit more just to really get it nice and neat. Make sure your lining is nice and tucked in. And there you have it. This is a little crease that's going to need a bit of a press to get some of those creases out from the birthing process. But you can see you have your very simple, basic paper pouch done. I am going to make a video that shows how to make the wrist strap. I'm going to do that in a separate little add-ons video, but that will be up shortly. So this is the basic version, and I'm also going to show you one that's got an exterior zipper on it, and then a third one that has an interior zipper pocket, and you can do any of those options on your pouch. Okay, but that's the first one done. I'll give it a press and get some pictures. Thanks, everyone.